Hey team, welcome back to another episode of the Strength Game Podcast. I'm your host, Nick O'Brien, and this is episode number 103. The Strength Game is a weekly podcast dedicated to discussing all things physical culture with the coaches, athletes, iron enthusiasts, and experts deeply embedded in the strength game on both sides of the profession, both as coaches and as competitive athletes. I want to thank everyone who has taken the time to give us a 5-star rating, has reviewed the show, has reached out. Your support, liking, sharing, commenting, all those things allow us to continue to bring on expert guests and highlight more individuals in the strength game, just like our guest today. Also want to thank our sponsors. Samson Equipment provides first-class weight rooms and has earned an exceptional reputation of providing the finest quality, design, and customer service. Being a direct manufacturer, the team at Samson brings full customization capabilities and not only branding, but in custom equipment needed to execute your next project. From racks, plates, barbells, benches, flooring storage, dumbbells, and much more, Samson equipment is durable and made to order from premium grade materials, all built from scratch, start to finish. Samson equipment provides professional weight room solutions for all your strength and conditioning needs. See the Samson standard for yourself and learn more at samsonequipment.com. Also want to thank our sponsor, Cerberus Strength. Owned and operated by active lifters, Cerberus is trusted by the top strength sport athletes and lifters in the world. Cerberus's wide range of products are made by athletes for athletes, truly living up to its moniker, made by the strong for the strong. If you're in the market for the highest quality strength conditioning gear and strongman equipment, be sure to use promo code strength_game at checkout to receive 10% off your next order at cerberusstrength.com. And this week's episode, I am joined by Coach Joe Kenn. Joe is the Vice President of Performance Education at Dynamic Fitness and Strength, where he leads the development and delivery of cutting-edge fitness and strength training programs and resources for athletes, coaches, and trainers. Coach Kenn has over 30 years of experience as a performance specialist and strength and conditioning coach. He has worked with athletes at all levels, from high school to professional, across various sports and disciplines. Coach Kenn has been a head coach at 4 major universities and an NFL team, a national, regional, and state level speaker, and the creator of the tier system training and the Block Zero concept. Coach House began his career as an assistant athletic fitness director at Wake Forrest University in 1991, before starting a graduate assistant position at Boise State University. He was later promoted to full-time assistant coach following his graduate assistantship, and a year later became the head strength coach, where he held that title at Boise from 1994 to 1999. Coach Kenn spent 2 seasons as the director at the University of Utah before landing at Arizona State University as the head sports performance coach from 2001 to 2007. From there, he spent 2 years leading the University of Louisville football program, training before jumping to the NFL as the head strength and conditioning coach for the Carolina Panthers. He spent 2011 to 2020 with the Panthers before arriving at his current position working with Dynamic. In addition to working with high-level collegiate programs and professionals in the NFL, Coach Kenn has been the strength coach for Brian Shaw for the last couple years on his quest for the 5th World's Strongest Man title. Coach Kenn is a master strength conditioning coach and boasts such awards as the 2015 NFL Strength Conditioning Coach of the Year, 2013 National Strength Conditioning Coaches Association Professional Strength Coach of the Year, 2000 NSCA Mountain West Strength Coach of the Year, and 1998's Big West NSCA Strength Conditioning Coach of the Year. He is the author of multiple books, including The Coach's Strength Training Playbook and Push, Jump, Punch, a developmental process for teaching the athlete to power clean. He is the owner of Big House Power, which is a subscriber-based website designed for educational and professional development for all levels of strength coaches. In addition to all this, Coach Kenn has been training long before he began coaching and continues to develop himself in the weight room as a strength athlete. A former letterman for the Demon Deacons football team at Wake Forrest University, he also competed multiple times in powerlifting, both in the raw and single ply division. I'm excited to have him on the show today. So, with all that said, let's get in the game with Coach Joe Kenn. What's going on, everybody? Today, I am super excited. We've got a legend on the show. We've got Coach Joe Kenn. How you doing today, Coach?
Great. Thank you, Nick, for having me. I appreciate it. And hopefully we don't bore the audience.
There's no way that's going to happen. And if anyone is bored with this show, then they definitely haven't subscribed. They definitely haven't followed the show along, because I'm super excited about this one. And I waited a long time to reach out, probably longer than I wanted to get to like episodes 100 and beyond, to get some of like my favorite all-time coaches on. So I'm glad the show lasted this long so I could actually do this. So hey, I'm excited. So without further ado, Coach, can you kind of talk about like how you really got in the strength game? Like, where did your passion for lifting and like playing sports kind of derive to get you to what you do now to still train and stay active?
Well, I would have to go off, man. That's a pretty long story, but my dad had weights in the basement of our house, and so I've always seen it. And more importantly, if I jump a little bit ahead, my high school football program was way ahead when it came to strength training. I mean, our high school football coach played at Virginia Tech. He played at the same high school I did with my dad. So I had a connection early on to watching guys lift weights, not really understanding where that would take me, but knowing that if I wanted to play football at the high school, at some point in time, I'd be lifting weights at the high school. I would think that I started probably touching weights, what people would consider middle school. I don't know if it was just more that we were just picking weights up, didn't really have any idea of what we were really doing, but there was weights around, so we picked them up. I would say organizationally wise, really was probably in my high school at the time, ninth grade was junior high. So 7, 8, and 9 was junior high, 10, 11, 12 was senior high. So I wasn't exposed to the high school until my sophomore year, but as a freshman, we started bussing over. One of my dad's 3 jobs was he worked the afternoon shift driving the school bus. So he would pick up a bunch of us at the junior high and then drive us over to the high school so we could start lifting with the team. So I would say that ninth grade year going into 10th grade was probably when organized strength training came into my regime, so to speak. And, like anybody else, I mean, you follow a program and you've never been exposed to that. Next thing you know, you got muscles and, you're looking in the mirror like, whoa, where'd this come from? And this. So I think the motivation at first was like anybody else at that age, especially a male. Is the aesthetics, right? You're walking around and, by that, that time that was mid 80s, that's the Lee Haney era, the Corey Everson era on muscle and fitness. And, there was some Rich Gaspari in the later 80s. And, those were things, Arnold was, everybody talk about Lou Ferrigno was the Incredible Hulk at that time on TV. So you get exposed to that stuff. And, when you start seeing clips of the very first World's Strongest Man and Franco Columbu, Ken Patera, and things like that. And, Don Reinhardt and Bruce Wilhelm, and you start getting exposed to things. And you kind of gravitate to it. For me personally, the weight room was a necessary, I don't want to say evil, but it was necessary in my advancement in sports because I was probably, athletically marginal. There's, people like to say they're athletic. I was a football player. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and lie to you. I wrestled 2 years. I wrestled early, played all kinds of sports as a youth through the Inwood Buccaneer Association that was in our area. But when I got to high school, I was playing football. My sophomore year was just a football player and intramural softball, right? And I started getting recruited. And back then, if you started getting recruited early, somebody saw something. It's nowhere like it is now. Like now, they're recruiting kids at 2 years old. So for you to start getting colleges to talk about you to your coaches going into your junior year was a big deal. And so from that standpoint, they talked to me about wrestling more for balance and coordination. And obviously for me personally, from a financial standpoint, if I didn't get a scholarship, I wasn't going to college. So I was going to do whatever I needed to do, which was necessary for me to, get out of so-called Inwood, the town I lived in, not in a bad way. I just, I had goals and aspirations that I hoped to achieve and wasn't going to be able to achieve that without going to college. So joined the wrestling team, got my butt kicked by 3 guys every day, John Canizaro, Dempsey Wilson, and Don Poprillo. So Donnie and Dempsey were our 2 running backs and linebackers. They wrestled 167 and 177, and they just destroyed me. And then John played next to me as an offensive lineman and also played fullback. He was the 220, and then I was the 250. So I got beat up every day in practice. Those dudes were legitimate wrestlers. They were more skilled than I was, and probably from a pure toughness standpoint, tougher than I was. I mean, I was what I call football tough. I wouldn't consider myself a street tough type of guy. Those dudes were street tough. Like they wore me out. Like it wasn't even fun going to practice knowing you were going to get your butt whipped regardless of who you wrestled. I mean, but they taught me a lot. And the things that the football coaches that were recruiting me were hoping that wrestling would developed. I mean, my coordination, my balance, I did get tougher. I mean, I had to. I mean, I was getting my butt kicked every day at a certain point in time, whether you're getting your butt kicked or not, you got to fight back. So all that realization of training really helped me get my goal, was to be offered a scholarship. And I like to tell people I was extremely fortunate that I had a tremendous football coach in Rich Mallow, but more importantly, I had a tremendous offensive defensive line coach in Mike Stamilli, who was way ahead of the game for high school techniques. Like I was so advanced by that when I got to college that they didn't believe I got that taught by an offensive line coach in college or defensive line coach in high school, excuse me. So I just continued to work to put myself in a position where I could go to school for free. And fortunately for me, I like to say I was fortunate that I got to choose where I went to school. I didn't have to go somewhere because I had limited options. And I think it was a combination of organized strength training, listening to my dad, listening to my high school coach, joining the wrestling team, getting beat up, learning different traits. And, and again, there was an article a long time ago that helped you decipher what a multi-sport athlete was. It was in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning by the NSCA. And this is when the NSCA journal was written by coaches for coaches. Very few articles with what I call numerous references. It was practical stuff. What were you doing in the weight room? It'd be like, strength training for football, the Fresno State way by Ronnie McKeefe, right? When you were with Ronnie at Fresno, and then he just detailed his program. Like there ain't no references for that. So that's where you learned a lot. So they had an article about multi-sport athletes where you have an AA multi-sport athlete or an AB, and an AA is those that excel at both sports. and an AB was where they used the B sport to enhance their A sport. So I was definitely an AB multi-sport athlete or two-sport athlete in high school, but I had success in wrestling. I definitely won more than I lost. My motto was slam or be slammed, because I only knew about 3 moves, 2 throws, and get off the bottom as fast as you can and get back to your feet. So I did see a lot of gym ceilings, but I saw less than the amount of people that saw it when I was on top of them. But it was a good experience, and it paid off. So I would think that when I really knew it was going to be a professional aspiration was my first 3 seasons in college. I was hurt. I blew my knee out as a freshman in first spring ball. Sat out another year. I got redshirted year 1, blew my knee out spring, sat out another year, another surgery that spring, came back to third year, redshirt sophomore, blow my other knee out. That's when I realized, yeah, you're not going pro, so now you really got to hunker down in school. And I lived in the weight room with my strength coach, who just, matter of fact, just passed away last week. But I lived with him, and I continued to watch I would just watch, like, you can actually do this for a job, right? Like, you could teach kids to lift weights and go to work in a t-shirt and a coach and have some fun and work guys hard. And it kind of gravitated towards, you know what? I love the weight room. The weight room made me all of what I was for the most part. This is something I think I can pursue. So I majored in health and sports science and started my path. So that would have been probably 1986 when I committed to being a strength coach, joined the NSCA in 1986 as a student. And just, back then there wasn't a lot to gravitate to. Like I said, the NSCA journals, Joey had them in the office, so I could grab those. But once you joined, I was getting them myself. So, I mean, I've got journals in my garage from 1986 somewhere. So that was the path I took, and I went all in. I went to Wake Forest, which is a highly academic school, and here I want to watch guys lift weights for my job. But I went to Wake Forest for other reasons. I didn't go for the academics. I went for the ability to play football early in my career without having to sit out much, and then that got derailed by injury. So I dedicated my studies, I dedicated my life towards the weight room, and till this day, it's a huge part of who I am and what I do. My hobby's lifting weights, and they go, well, what's your job? Well, I'm a weight coach. So I'm never really not around it, but I don't feel like it's a hindrance. Like, I know a lot of people get a hobby away from who you are or what you do on a daily basis, but mine is just it's an ingrained part of who I am. I don't think most of the athletes that I've worked with and the people that know me or my former teammates would not truly understand that this is what I am. And I think that benefits me when it comes to coaching and things like that, because I live it and I understand what happens in the weight room, positive and negative. And I can relate some of the things kinesthetically when I'm teaching athletes what's going on. Obviously, depending on the level of athlete you coach, you have more experience to harp on. Fortunately for me, I played at a high level, Division I athlete, so I understand those complexities. Not, you have to learn it now more with the way the environment and the structure of the organizations and the rules that are putting into college athletics today. But as far as the athletic part and what it takes, I understand that. The NFL, I had to learn that. So I had to rely on players. I had to rely on the team. I had to rely on the coaches that coached the NFL much longer than me to establish a respect level that's a little different. Like, I don't care what anyone says. Athlete's going to give you a little bit more respect if they know you've been through what they've been through. And when you finally get to a level of coaching where you haven't reached that point, And that's for me was going to a professional football team. You have to prove your mettle in other ways. I'm not saying you got to show them how hard you lift weights, but you have to show them that you have value to them prolonging their career. That's something you learn in the weight room, right? You watch how guys interact. The weight room is like, it's a soapbox, and there's a lot of things that go on. It's almost a soap opera sometimes because a lot of things are said in the weight room that aren't going to be said anywhere else. A lot of things occur in the weight room that aren't necessarily going to occur in a locker room or a meeting room or on a practice field. So it's an interesting environment, and you have to learn how to steer that car through the various roads if you want to be successful. If people ask me, what does that mean? I don't know what it means. You got to figure that out yourself. I mean, there's a lot of times where, people talk about, oh, that guy has gifts. What is a gift? A gift is an indescribable or undescribable action because that's why it's a gift. It's something that you can't define. So that's kind of how it all worked out. If it wasn't for me being exposed at an early age, or my dad taking me up to watch the guys lift at high school, or my evolution into it I saw what it did for an average athlete. And I think that's where we were talking a little bit about off air, where as a strength coach, like, I love it. One of the first things I had to remind myself was not everybody's going to love it like you, bro. Like, you love coming in here. Some of these dudes don't want to even be in here. Like we were talking about, sports can always be played without the weight room. And we have to remember that. And there's guys even to today, guys that I've coached at the pro level that didn't need a lot of weight room. They just needed enough. I called it towards the end with some of my high level vets, small doses of excellence. They didn't just need a little touch, just a little touch up, go up to the oil change place, get a quick little oil change, and off you go. They didn't need no major reconstruction. Now some do. And that's your job as a coach, is evaluating the talent and evaluating the history of the athlete and developing a certain plan that, not every, a lot of athletes, like I said, they don't want to come in the weight room. You have to figure out ways that they understand that there is a level of importance regardless of who they are or how they see it. And that's our job. Our job is to figure out the communication of why you should come in here, especially with some of the, what I call in football, like some of the outside the box athletes, like your skills, your wideouts, your DBs, the further away you are from the ball, I don't want to say it's hard. Sometimes their mindset is, I don't need as much weight room as I need other things. And they're right. But there is a value to the weight room, and it's your job to make it where they may not want to come in, but they know there's value in coming in. And there is no value in a DB coming in if he's doing the same workout as an offensive lineman. You're never going to win that. Like, they're going to come in there because they're supposed to, and they don't want to get fined or they don't want to run for missing. But do you really think that effort is going to be at a high level? And again, it goes back to, the things that are controlled by the athlete are their attitude and effort. Well, if they already have a pissy attitude because they're like, man, this strength coach is going to make me lift like the damn lineman. Well, what kind of effort am I going to get when he comes in there? But if I or you or whoever the coach is makes a couple of tweaks to the program and it looks a little bit different than the lineman, and you're still getting the same goals and aspirations as a strength coach that you want to accomplish from the program, his effort's going to be better because his attitude's better. Oh yeah, I don't squat heavy like the lineman. I do goblet squat, or I do a rear foot elevated squat, or something like that. And that's the art of it, right? The science is the repetition counts for certain strength regimes, the metabolic demands, the rest times. The art is what's going to get you your wins with your athletes. It's not the science. Most guys are just going to walk in there, coach, I need to get bigger, right? Coach, I need to get faster. They don't care to sit down and figure out how that is. They just know that's your job. So the art is, can you develop a plan where they feel like, oh, I'm going to get better today because Coach House is going to get me right. Like he's going to take care of me. And that's the greatest of it all, is when when an athlete comes in at the end of the year and says, hey man, we did it. We made some good strides. I'll be back in a week to tell you what I think I need next year. And Greg Olson, who I coached at the Panthers, he was the best at that. Like there wasn't a year where he didn't come in within a week after, if not the day after the season, and go over what we did, where he felt he needed more work at, whether it would be some of his skill work versus some of the stuff in the weight room. And then we have to design a plan that keeps him within the realms of his fuel level. Like a lot of times I think some of the athletes feel like, hey, I'm going to work you hard. Like you got to work hard. Like people are talking about, work smarter, not harder. Yeah, that's not it. It's, you got to work smart and hard. Like I call it, and I've been saying that even beforehand. What I learned right away in going to the pros is there's smart hard and stupid hard, and you can't do stupid hard in the pros. You can do stupid hard in college because sometimes you just got to know what these guys got. And I don't mean it in a way like we did it back in the 90s, you'd get fired, but sometimes you've got to test people. And you just got to know, like, I need to know what's going to happen on fourth down. I need to know what's going to happen on the fifth set of a volleyball match. I need to know what's going to happen, in the last 2 minutes of a soccer match. I need to know what's going to happen on the third set or a fifth set of a tennis match. I just need to know if you got it. Like, if we develop your conditioning levels and your mental preparation, that when it gets to the nut, the nut cutting time where, hey man, championship's on the line, do you have it? And if we keep utilizing, the analytics and the statistics that are coming out now at high levels, and we're making it more of a detriment than it's supposed to be an attribute. We're not doing the athlete justice if they're not prepared for the hard part. The words strain and stress are like the F word. It's like, ooh, you don't want to stress them or strain them, but well, then you can't ask them to go to the next level in the middle of a game when they've never done it in practice. And, that's a story for another day, but that's part of who we are. That's part of the things that we have to be aware of. And we have to make conscious decisions based off what this new level of technology offers us, what science has offered us forever. And then what the art part of it is, what your heart tells you and what your experience tells you, and your communication with the athlete. You can look an athlete in the eye and know something's wrong regardless of what a readiness app tells you. That's the thing. And I'm always gonna use that stuff for affirmation. But if I see something's wrong and I see something in their eyes that's telling me different, I'm gonna go with that. Because again, I've seen it. I've seen guys who look worn out on a Wednesday wake up for a Thursday night game and they're all juiced up, ready to go because their fight or flight goes to the next level. And they know that I got to compete here tonight. And if I don't compete very well, I may lose my job. So there's a lot of different, for the older coaches, it's easy to adapt. And I think if you're a learnable individual, you can learn. For the newer coaches, I think the issue is those of them who are educating them are showing them all the now, but haven't given them enough of the history of how it got to now, so they have nothing to fall back on. And I think that's a crutch right now that's hindering some of the younger generations of performance coaches. It's not their fault. It's only your fault if you realize you're missing something and you don't go find the answers. Like for me, technology has increased tremendously even since I've been gone. And there are certain things that if I'm not involved in that space, how do I learn it? You ask for help. I'm very fortunate that, I work with Hawken Dynamics and I have force plates at my house that I'm trying to figure out ways not just from a readiness standpoint, but like how do I use them to get somebody better? Like single limb deficiencies. We always know there's going to be single limb issues, right? We're never going to be completely balanced. But that doesn't mean we can't figure out where that threshold is and how can we help correct that or at least be aware of that. Just like if I'm going to be the data guy or the GPS coach, but I never go watch practice, and one of the things that the GPS monitors can bring, whether it's right or wrong or indifferent, is like a step balance, right? Your balance checks in court, and you see this guy's overloaded one side, and you're getting all nervous. This guy can't practice. He's going to get hurt. He's going to get hurt. Well, he might be your left tackle. And, or he might be your first baseman. I mean, there's just certain things that certain position groups are going to, you're going to be compensating one way or the other. So those are things that I think we have to be aware of. Like, how do we use this, again, for affirmation, but as well as understanding the roles of each athlete, especially when it comes to player loads and yardages based off of the norms of a position group. If you're on the bottom of the so-called depth chart as a DB and a linebacker in the NFL, you're going to play a lot of special teams. So your yardages and your high-speed runnings are going to be way different than the typical starter at those positions. But yet, a lot of times the data that you're getting processed is based off the norms of that position group. So, of course, your sixth or seventh linebackers are always going to be spiked in practice. They're getting judged on what the first team guys are doing, if that makes sense. So those, again, you have to take all this into context. If it says on 4th and 1, if you go for it at this point of the game, there's a 90% chance of success. It doesn't tell you what the chance of success is if it's raining and your quarterback's got a broken pinky finger that's taped up right now, but we got to get through the game. Do we play in the shotgun or do we play under center? So for every statistical anomaly they can give you, there's other performance indicators that can judge differently without even going into the environmental or the actual factors that happen in the game. Like for me, if okay, on 4th and 1 from this period of time, okay, well, what's the percentages of grass versus turf? Right? Hey, the running back is 100% on 4th and 1 from this period. Okay, what size cleat, what cleat length is he wearing? You see how I'm saying you can just dive in more and more. At some point in time, you just got to call a play and go. Like, let's go. And the coach has to make a split decision. He's got 40 seconds to make that decision. And you just got to go sometimes with experience, and sometimes you roll the dice, and sometimes you don't. And you just got to live with it. But that's the big thing now with technology and analytics and data is, at the end of the day, one thing that you is hard to measure is the emotional quotient of an individual at that time. A lot of times, people who believe in numbers don't believe in momentum, right? They don't believe in the flow. They don't believe in getting on a roll, right? But yet we see it all the time. You listen to athletes. What do they talk about? Oh, we had the momentum. Oh, that turnover changed the whole game for us. Michael Jordan, the game slowed down. I was in slow mo. Everybody was in slow motion. And I was full speed, right? I could have made that shot with my eyes closed. I was in the rhythm so much. So it's just we grasp at straws and we jump into it too much, too fast, without, I think, especially in the way performance has evolved with the amount of expertise that's out there now, instead of the general contractor type of coaching positions we had when we first started, because there wasn't all this expertise. There wasn't these individuals who realized that I'm going to specifically study this specific detail of performance, where we all had to be a little bit of, like I said, general contractor and that takes away from what you want your expertise to be.
Right.
So there's
No,
my ramble and tangent number one, I guess.
no, that's awesome. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. It's cool to kind of see your inception to everything and how everything from the weight room kind of bled into you having a passion for coaching and how those kind of smoothly went into the other. And you, like, I'm sorry to hear about your high school coach and but like for you to find with him like a passion for the weight room and then be able to take that and transform it into college and then unfortunately deal with as many injuries, but it really solidified your career path moving forward. And I think you're right with a lot of the stuff you talked about. And yeah, it might, for like someone that doesn't know strength conditioning, feel like it is a rambling, but it's because you have so much years of experience that like as soon as you take a topic one way, so many other things pop up. And it's a perfect way to listen to it because I track it easily. But yeah, like what we were talking about at the very end, that feeling that like those high level athletes get, it's undescribable. It's a feeling. So if you're using technology, it should just really kind of affirm or maybe give you a little bit more ease that your gut, your coach's eye, that communication you have with your athletes, it's kind of justifiable in a way. You don't want it to be the first thing you rely on because then it would say that your experience and like your social skills and all those kind of character traits and intangibles that you possess don't mean as much as just a computer telling me what you did equals this. You need to have that balance and you need to have that experience. And like I think you said as well too, just the experience that you had from all the college levels prepared you for higher level athletes with higher skill levels, with more on the line, with more experience. You had to kind of match that, even if you didn't have um, the level of experience of playing that with them. You had to find other ways to get there. And I know throughout your career, like you've not just worked with football either. Like you've worked every sport and like if anybody knows, like back in the 90s and back in the early 2000s too, even if you had football, sometimes you had a lot of sports or the
Yeah.
director might have had 10, including football. So I'm sure that helped a lot along the way too. What about like some of those experiences kind of prepared you for what you're doing now, or even like when you had a single sport in the NFL, because you got to work with so many different athletes, because you got so much time on the floor just coaching.
I think that's the biggest thing, right? If you're going to be a coach and you're going to talk about professional development, the best professional development you can do is grab the staff, go on the floor, and just talk about coaching. Not so much style. Everybody has to develop their own style based their personality, but more about technical aspects, what types of things you see with athletes, what would be good cues, finding the right buzzwords that work. But I think when you brought up the the sports and when I first started, you had a head strength coach and a GA. That was pretty much it. That was your strength staff for everything. And and as much as we talk about in the recruiting process, are you was he a multiple or was she a multiple sport athlete? There's a lot I look at when I hire. Were they a multi-sport strength coach? Can they evolve, even to the point where a multi-sport strength coach early in their career will be a better single sport strength coach. It's just inherently going to happen. You're exposed to so much. And, like you asked, if it wasn't for women's basketball, really, with June Doherty at Boise State, I would have never developed the tier system. She was, back then in the 90s, again, strength training had just started really blowing up in schools. And a lot of times that when other sports started in incorporating the weight room into their daily and weekly regimes, the strength coach didn't have enough time, so they just gave them whole football programs. And June in one of my very first meetings, and I didn't take it any other way than here's a coach who wants better for their team. And she goes, I just like it to be a day where I didn't get the old football programs. And I took that to heart. And I thought she had a lot of merit. I mean, Why do they need to train 4 days a week? Like, why does anybody need to train 4 days a week? That's just me. I know why. I know why you can fight that debate however you want. But so for me, I started out with the Olympic sports. I had mostly all the Olympic sports at Boise State. So my biggest sports, like right off the bat, women's volleyball was number one. Women's basketball was the sport that enhanced my thought process. And then I acquired the gymnastics team. And then, track and field did their own programming because Ed Jacoby at the time, the head track coach, was the number one jump coach in the world. So he traveled the world and he designed his programming based off what he was able to acquire, learned a tremendous amount from Ed. And that's a story, but a story for another day is, so Ed was there, retired. His assistant took over, knew nothing about the weights. I wrote the weight programs that year. The assistant who had took over, Randy, did not like being the head guy, so he stepped down. Ed came back, and when he asked Randy, what would you do different if you were me coming back, he just said, have Joe write the strength programs. So when I met with Ed and we went through a bunch of different stuff and he turned it over to me, that's when I knew I was on my way, because Ed Jacoby wasn't going to give up anything that he didn't think was going to affect his athletes, but nothing in a positive way. And, I did men's tennis, women's tennis, golf. I worked all those teams and I wrote all those programs, but it was the women's basketball team and June Doherty who really got the head spinning on, okay, how can I take what I know and develop a plan that's not just women's basketball, but based on like training an athlete. Like, and again, the 4-day split, that was from powerlifting. I incorporated the 3-day. I mean, people had done 3-day with the high, low, medium type of training days, which was undulated periodization, and we didn't even know it, right? So it's just funny how nomenclature and stuff kind of rolls through, and you're like, we were already doing that with Bill Starr's high, moderate, low 3-day approach. But for me, it became a quest of like I said, taking what I knew. So the 3-day approach to me had value from a standpoint of athletics because it was based off of the HIT model of whole body training. So you train the entire body each session. Well, isn't that what most sports are? Again, except for your Paralympics or some of your things like that, your adaptive athletes, you may have to adapt your program. But when we're talking about in general, most team sports that most of us coach, the athlete's standing on the ground and you have actions that work from the toe to the head. So breaking that up from a upper body, lower body split, so to speak, in your 4-day processes, really to me was my first justification. Well, athletics isn't played that way. And I also felt with the amount of running and practice early on, asking somebody to do something 4 days a week that doesn't rank super high in the way their ranking of needs during the day is, so to speak. I mean, practicing your sport's always number one. So unless you're a lifter, the weight room's never number one. And and in lifting, the conditioning aspect has changed a lot for all the lifting sports, but the truth is lifting's lifting. So you don't have to factor in too much conditioning compared to what you do with a team sport setting. I work with Brian Shaw the last 4 years. We're doing conditioning work, but it's a different type of metabolic demands. A lot of his conditioning works are lighter events being done for multiple reps with different rest times and different distances. It's, certain sports, you can condition them very specifically, right? A lot of all the ball sports that have non-contact, you can play year round. Football, you're not playing year round. So that's a totally different dynamic when you're looking at conditioning programs. Excuse me. So just to get back to the strength stuff, because that's where true expertise is the programming of strength for athletes, is so now you look at the concept of, the Olympic-based model, right? Train fast exercises first, structural exercises second, supplemental exercises third. And there's a huge truth to that, right? Because for them, train the fast exercises first has value because they're only taking 6 lifts. They're not taking fourth quarter explosive lifts. They're not 3 hours into a game where they've got to generate a high level of power and explosiveness. So for them, there is merit. Train fast exercises first. And this is before I was introduced to the dynamic effort method. But my concept was every coach, especially, and I'll relate a lot of it to football just to make it easy. But every football coach you talk to, we got to win the fourth quarter. Well, if I need to win the fourth quarter, but I'm training the athlete in the weight room to win the first quarter, I think I got to figure something out. So I started moving so-called these explosive movements around the exercise order to train the athlete for what people call a misnomer, for what I considered power capacity. So you have work capacity, right, where you're just building a high level of base. But in athletics, a lot of sports need power capacity, the ability to maintain a high level of explosiveness for a long duration of time. How can you elicit that response in a weight room? By trying to implement explosive type movements as the athlete continues to fatigue. Now, again, does that mean I'm going to do a full clean and jerk an hour into a strength program? Probably not. But I can do a single arm snatch. I can do some type of jump as I evolve my program to continue to build this. And again, that's metabolic demand. That's science. That's the science of it, right? Trying to figure out what the athlete can adapt to. And that's one thing that I think where I've gotten some affirmation, and people are going to probably cringe when I say this, is by watching professional competitive strongman. Not strongman, but even them, is CrossFit. Because if you watch what a CrossFit athlete at that level, I'm talking about the elite, the ones that are on TV, working for a $300,000 paycheck to win the CrossFit game. What they do, not only day to day, but WOD to WOD, we were told from a physiological standpoint couldn't be done. From a strength standpoint, what some of these strongmen would have been told, we were told that some of that shouldn't be physically done. So what has it showed you is, if you stress and strain an athlete that has that type of capability, they will do things that we were told could not be done. So when you look at it through science, you can physiologically see that there are individuals out there who can accomplish things. Whether you believe, CrossFit high volume plyometrics is right or wrong, that's a debate for a different time. I have my thoughts on that too. But when you watch the professionals do it, right, it gets you thinking like, okay, I'm dealing with high level, elite level Division I athletes. And again, this is stuff that has confirmed some of the things I believed in the 90s. Now that, okay, I wasn't that much off the wall, because these people have proven there is some belief in the concept of being explosive through a long period or a long duration of time. And again, sometimes that doesn't mean, hours, but like when you watch an athlete at the CrossFit Games do a snatch ladder, a heavy snatch ladder, and do that many high performance singles that fast over a period of time, that tells you what can be accomplished. Right. And so for me, it was always looking at it from what is the athlete being asked to do, and how can I challenge that in a non-competitive area of training, and in a combative types of ways that can mimic that type of energy demands that may happen in their sport is that can I transfer some of that over? And the biggest thing you could transfer is when you watch an athlete, do a 3-hop record an hour and a half into a weight room, it gives them the confidence to know that they have the ability to play at high levels of power and explosiveness when the game can be on the line. So those are the things that you try to evolve into on top of the other things that fall into play. And again, you go back and watch the test of time on championship teams, there is no norms when it comes to what we do in the performance realm. Excuse me. So for everything that I may believe in, you may believe in the exact opposite. And if we compared team championships and overall success, could be very similar. But again, because it goes back to the athletes, the confidence of the athletes, the belief in what they're doing on the field and off the field, the type of coaching they're getting, the tactical, the tech. There's so much things that come into play that we have to just be mindful of that there's a lot of things going on. For every time you win a championship, I want to say it was because of the weight room. Well, then you better remember the next year when you're 2-12 that it was because of the weight room. Yeah. And that's something that you learn early on is if you're gonna ride that wave when you think you're big time, you got to ride that wave when it crashes. And that's one thing. As you get older, you become a lot like I became really level-headed my last part of my career with the Panthers because winning and losing matters. Like I miss winning and losing. Like I missed the opportunity to win, knowing there's a chance I could lose. But I remember, like, my biggest concern was, okay, what's the injury report going to look like tomorrow? Like, what did any of my guys get really banged up? Or even the other team. There's a lot of time with some of the guys I made really good relationships with over 9 years. Our first comments was, "Did you come out healthy?" Like, it wasn't even a matter who won the game. Is, "Did you guys come out pretty healthy?" Or, "Man, I saw your guy went down. Is he going to be okay?" That you start resonating into more of the humanistic part of the game rather than whether you won or lost, because that's the key. The key is these athletes' careers are on the line. The last thing you want them to be is be hurt. And then if they are, what can you do to expedite the recovery process so they can get back out there and keep their livelihood going? So yeah, it's a lot of there's a lot of spokes on the wheel. There's a lot of meshing, right? There's a lot of spinning thread and twine, and how it all intermixes is a crucial part of understanding the game. And that's why I think as long as the emotional quotient and the human concept evolve, their artificial intelligence will help, but it's not going to be helping much when it comes to communication and relating to another human being.
Right. No, that's a great point. I know that's another tangent to get on the AI stuff. I don't want to touch that, but you're right. We talked about it too so many times that just the communication and kind of the intangible things and that communication that you have with an athlete, like you're building trust, you're developing some rapport, and an athlete might come in and have, especially like when you get to the level, like when you're in the NFL, most of those players have to know like who you are before they even get drafted. Like who's my strength coach, or know kind of the pedigree, or they know more stuff about you. So they're already kind of in their head playing like what this relation is going to be a positive relationship.
I would tell you it's almost the exact opposite. Some of
Really?
those guys have no clue. Like we had guys get drafted that didn't know Ron Rivera played in the NFL.
No way.
And again, but like let's be realistic. You've said, Nick, that you've been in the strength game for 10 years. How many kids do you know coming up know who Boyd Epley is?
Like actual coaches or athletes?
No, coaches, like brand new strength coaches. I can tell you,
not too many.
Okay, so then why would Why would a college guy who just got drafted know who their strength coach is in the pros?
Yeah.
I mean,
It,
it's just the way it is. I mean, that
I
people are
know.
not, it's still, and again, I don't look at that good, better, and different. I look at it halfway surprised, that you get drafted in the NFL to a coach, to a team that's coached, not only played in the NFL for 9 years, but played on one of the greatest football teams ever assembled, and defensively, the 85 Bears. Like, and again, I look at it this way. Like I said, do you know how many times I speak? And I make sure I bring up Boyd all the time, because without Boyd Epley, none of us will have jobs. And half these people are looking at me like, huh. I mean, and I know those people I know the Dr. Fights are doing a great job at Springfield, but you bring up Mike Woysick and Rusty Jones, and those kids don't know that here's two of the greatest strength coaches in the history of the NFL. They're Springfield grads. They don't know that.
That's crazy. Well, I mean, you
So
kind of did it too. Like you talked about some of those bodybuilders like from the 80s, and like I wasn't born until like 90. So I was like, I haven't heard of those guys too. So I've kind of fallen victim to that as well, where you don't you trace like the lineage back a couple years or whatever it is, like maybe a decade or two, like whenever you kind of fell in love with coaching or training, and like you kind of go back a little bit, but you don't really venture too far past the people that like you first kind of learn about. And then you just kind of pick up stuff along the way. A lot of people don't like kind of dig back into the golden age. I know that one book that came out, like the for strength conditioning, like it really
yeah,
kind of highlighted it.
that's a must read for most strength coaches.
Yeah,
If you're like, I'm in what, decade four, so my 40th, I'm in my fourth decade, what, 30 something years. But like, if you didn't come up in the late 80s and early 90s, you need to read that book, because those people gave you a job,
right.
and you need to know what it used to be like. Like everybody, and again, the money's getting better. At some places it's not, but you listen to the dudes like, yeah, my first job was a head strength coach for, at App State. I got paid zero and lived in the storage room, right? So, now, the basic, I mean, a kid walks out of college with a CSCS, doesn't even know how to spell the weight room, and he's fallen into a $55,000 a year job and wants 100. So it's
Different
again,
times.
that's just. But again, I think that like I live in the present. I review the past, because you have to learn, and then I'm opportunistic that the future is bright. But you have to understand the history of what we've done as a profession or a career, how to strengthen, it wasn't strength and conditioning, it was strength coach, because they just wanted you to get stronger. Then they added conditioning. The very first support member of a sports staff was the athletic trainer. People need to understand that. Like, that was probably the number one support staff introduction into sports, was we need somebody to take care of people when they're hurt. Then it evolved. Then there's the weight coach. Then there's the nutrition. Then there's sports science, whatever that means, right? Now there's mental health, which I think is crucial. Some people like myself believe you take athletic training and you split it, so there's rehabilitation is a separate department. It keeps on going. Then you have, at different places, then you go into your secondary role, your assistant coaches, your player engagement, right? Academic counseling. All these people are part of the holistic approach of giving the athlete the best chance for a future and an understanding of what there is to be had.
Yeah, that's a great point too. Like obviously, like looking back at some of the present and like really understanding what if you're a young coach, or even like a coach like myself that's been in it for more than a decade, like there's still a lot of things that you can learn about from some of those former coaches. Like I've had some great mentors that have been like master strength coaches, like Coach Mack, obviously, and like a lot of other coaches along the way that have been had 10 plus years on me just when I was starting. And I learned a lot from them, but in the same breath, like there's even more out there that you can kind of add to see like how the profession's changed. Like even now too, that you see how many like coaches are trying to change the department to be like athletic performance or sports performance. Like It's
We were the
still
first. We were the first ones to do sports performance in 2002. At 2003, going into the 2003 uh, calendar year, we introduced the term sports performance at Arizona State because of I had an opportunity to move on, and we went through different things to keep me, and I launched that, and I could tell you the quick story about how it became sports performance, because I mean, and again, we were the forefront. I mean, somebody wants to debate me, I can show you the 14-page paper we turned in to the administration. But what happened then is, at that point in time, strength and conditioning had evolved, right? I think Doc Crease was the very first one that called it speed strength and conditioning when he was at Middle Tennessee, I believe or was it Colorado? One of the two schools, he started calling himself a speed strength and conditioning coach. And, I know a lot of people started falling into that time period too, where they were calling themselves general physical preparation coaches based off of when Louis Simmons had explored into the Russian model of training, where we have general preparation and specific preparation. But sports performance came because at that time at Arizona State, on our campus was athletes performance, which most of you would know as Exos. So we had athletes performance. We had also seen the evolution of athletic training turning into sports medicine, which rightfully so, right? There's a lot more going on than your standard athletic training modalities in a training room at this point in time. So it was kind of, for me, when I'm watching the individualistic of elite athletes over at athletes performance, right? Improving an athlete's performance, watch the evolution of athletic training morph into sports medicine. I really took a little bit of both of those two names and transformed strength and conditioning to sports performance. I liked how it dealt with team sports and the enhancement of performance from a general term gave us a broader definition of just buzzword strength and conditioning. Because if you go through strength and then you really break down strength, how many different types of strength are we developing in the weight room? Relative strength, starting strength, absolute strength, maximal strength, right? Speed strength, explosive strength, all these different terms that we create fall under that. What is conditioning, right? Anaerobic, aerobic, lactic, alactic, short, long, moderate sprints, interval, position specific, COD drills, reaction drills, all this stuff, comes in on top of all the other things, mobility, flexibility, prehab, right? All the buzzwords. So it just was an easy morph. And I don't know if I would have even thought that if athletes performance wasn't on our campus, where I saw how they termed it from their standpoint. But again, sports medicine and athletic training, they were the first, so that they did a nice job of enhancing their brand, right? Really, back then we didn't know it was called branding, but that's really what they did. They took athletic training and morphed it to sports medicine. Well, really, what sounds more important, athletic training or sports medicine? It's not a degrade, because the same thing for us. What sounds more important, strength and conditioning or sports performance? It's just a way to enhance the brand, really. So, yeah, I think, and then now from there, again, that's why, I don't mind the nomenclature stuff, because I'm part of the way I like changing things up. I mean, what really is your role? I think, but then I think you got to differentiate. Like you see all these times now where there's got to be hierarchies and stuff. You hire somebody to be the director of high performance, he can't oversee the director of strength and conditioning. It's the same friggin' title. But because we just continue to just jump at things without sitting back, or the higher level administrators who are making these decisions, because they're all trying to not be last, so they absorb all this stuff in, we have to do a better job of the people at the higher levels of really sitting back. What are we looking for? What does this role look like? And this is where I think a lot of times these high performance models are not being as successful as they could be because of the evaluation processes and the lack of time being invested by the higher level administrators making these decisions to really understand what they don't know as well as what they do know when they're putting these plans together. And that's something that I've been on a vehemently high level of study and observation the last 4 years, because the good thing about not being in the rat race of the coaching world, where you think you're doing things at a different level, watching things from the 10,000-foot view and not being in the space, your perceptions are really more clear and more open and understanding to the problems that are being out there, and hopefully finding solutions for people that are in the space that you can bring to them to help them understand why certain things succeed versus why certain things fail.
Right. Yeah, you're not in the kind of day to day where you're at that like tactical level where you have to be involved with it. You can kind of sit back at the strategic level and see. And because you have so much experience, you know exactly kind of what's going to happen before it does. And you can kind of present those solutions. Now, that's pretty cool. I didn't realize that you guys were at the forefront of doing that, because we at the beginning, I saw it just kind of as a gimmick. Like everybody was just doing it because there's not many people that want to be first. No one
Oh,
wants
I
to be
always want to
last.
be first. I'm not going to lie.
Well, no,
I
most people
like,
don't
and
want to do
again,
that.
but again, I always tell people I'm at that point in my career where I'm not going to apologize because I was willing to risk something. Like, I took a beating on the tier system by NSCA people in the 90s, took a beating because the program design model was everything that they were against. But there was value. And like I tell people, it's not my fault. I didn't write it. I developed it because I wanted to better the athletes at Boise State. I didn't write the article for any other reason, because back then, like I said, in those journals, it wasn't about what references you had. It was about what you were doing. And thank goodness Harvey Newton, who was the president of the NSA at the time, forced me to finish the article because I was pissed when I got my review. And Harvey was one of the greatest weightlifting coaches in United States history, and he's telling me, no, people need to read this. And that came through my assistant at the time, Rich Gray, who forced me to write the article. And I didn't know it was going to blow up. Like I tell people all the way, it's not my fault it's known around the world. I wrote the book because, again, my staff members like, you got to put this out there. So the article was in 96. The book came out in, I think, 2003, something in there. But again, those things were put out because of my staff members believing in it so much. Like you got to put this out there. And like I said, I'm not going to be bashful that people around the world do the tier system or attempt to do it, right? Because it's too simple sometimes. And I think sometimes people are like, yo, no. But, and again, it's not my fault that I was one of the first, if not the first, to do a leveling system in college with the block zero concept and work your way up. Because we all knew it, that we were training freshmen. We were doing a disadvantageous programming for freshmen by training them the way all the other levels of athletes were doing. Same thing that if we wrote a program for beginners and we were doing the seniors a disservice, because everybody trained the same way. When I first came into it, a lot of people said after your third year, your guys wouldn't get better, your athletes wouldn't get better because you wrote the same program. You weren't adapting to who they were. And again, I was one of the first to do that. I can't say I was the first, but I know I was the first to promote it where people adapted it. And now the block zero concept is, a mainstay in most of the high schools in the United States and at small colleges. People use that term like everybody says you should have trademarked it. But again, you don't think about that. I'm thinking about, man, I'm trying to help kids. Like I'm trying to help athletes, trying to help coaches understand like, hey, we have to invest more than just writing, a cookie cutter program where people like to think like, oh, well, we write cookie cutter programs. You know what? Everybody's writing cookie cutter programs. I call it bell curve. I call it bell curve programming. Write the program to the norm and then make the corrections to the people who are special. And then you have your high level special, and then you have your remedial people who need more work. But if you start with the bell curve mentality, you'll have a really good plan. And then it helps you adapt to those that fall on either end of the spectrum.
No, that's a great way to kind of put it too, because you don't want to say it's a cookie cutter program, but you have to kind of speak in generalities too when you're working with the team. Like most of your team is going to fall within that bell curve. You're going to have people that are going to need things on both sides, or you're going to have athletes that are going to be injured. But you still are working within a team. So you're not going to put out an individual program for every single person, because a lot of them still can do similar things and still get some benefit from it. But it's cool to see like you challenge a status quo in the beginning, and actually I'm glad that your assistants kind of pushed you to get it out there, because like I have all those books, and I know that was a big part of me kind of getting started in the profession, to realize that there was more than just what my first internship or what my first coach or what my coach in high school or what my friends were doing. I realized there's a lot more out there. And I think a coach's first stop is really impressionable on them, because they think they learned everything, and that's the way they have to do everything. And going out and kind of seeing your second place really kind of opens your eyes, especially if you find someone that's completely different, that there is more to coaching and there's a lot more ways to get to the end result you want. I know I want to touch on a little bit too, your time working with Brian Shaw, because I'm with the NSCA's like Strawman Special Interest Group, and I know they would love it, and I'm jealous because I want to. Like, I've met Brian at a few competitions too, and he stuck out like a sore thumb when you go to a local competition. But what I really want to touch on for you, because being away from the profession and even like being for a little bit and then being in it for so long, the big question I wanted to ask you was like how you really kind of quantify or determine and measure success of a strength coach or a successful like strength conditioning program. Because we talked about it, if you're going to take credit for those wins, you better also take ownership over those losses. But like when you evaluate yourself at the end of the year, or you go in and provide feedback for someone that calls you in to just kind of see what they're doing or see their program, what are kind of the big things that you look for to determine if maybe they're doing a good job or ultimately they're doing justice for their athletes and being successful?
Well, I'll let me start with this. And I'm very blunt about this. I don't care what KPIs I measure first and foremost. That's very secondary. The only KPI that matters is what was the team's record, first and foremost. Because if we won, we're all victorious. If we lose, we're all losers. And so first and foremost, I think the record's going to determine a lot about how your program went that year. Like from a standpoint of when you're winning, a lot of times ticky-tack injuries are not even declared by the athlete because they don't want to miss out on the run that you're on. When you're losing, a lot of times that ticky-tack injury shows up on an injury report, and now it looks like, well, you lost because you had all these injuries. If that makes sense.
That makes
People
sense.
don't look at it. People don't look at that. So first and foremost, everything is based off the record. And if you don't win, you're getting fired. It doesn't matter how many 400-pound bench presses you have. It doesn't matter what your readiness app said all week. If you don't win enough, they're going to replace us. And that's something you better really be aware of if you sign up for team sports. That's part of being part of a team. And again, sometimes you have to look at even deeper behind the numbers. From a standpoint of I lost one of my jobs, and when I look back at what my role was, it was some of the best training we did. But I don't know if I did a good enough job of interacting with the head coach and giving him the feedback that I needed to based off the way the athletes responded to us in the weight room versus how they were responding on the practice field. So I'm part of the losing. You could say, oh, we had the best programming we ever wrote at this school. But what did I do that factored into us losing? This could have been one of the factors. I look at commonalities of injuries, because if there's a commonality of an injury, I'm not saying, hey, guess what? People are going to get hurt. I don't want to say that because I don't wish an injury on anyone. I lived it. I don't wish that on anyone. So is your program based off of helping to mitigate risk, or what I call protecting, right? How much protection work have you put in? And if you see a commonality of a certain injury that year, can you review your programming, whether it's field related or strength related? Was there something that you did not incorporate into the program that could have been a benefit to that, if that makes sense? If you have, let's just say, for example, you have this many injuries, but 50% were abductor injuries. Okay, well, then you go to the weight room and you go, well, and then you realize, okay, out of those abductor injuries, 40% came from defensive backs. And then you can say, you look at the program and you're like, we didn't do enough frontal plane and transverse plane lower body, what I call pseudo single leg movements. We spent too much time in defending the sagittal plane and didn't do more movements that are conducive to strengthening the muscles that are going to be fired at a high level on the field. And then you look at your field work. Did you do enough position specific movements where the athlete had to open and close the hip joint? Even if it's a matter of, did you do hurdle mobility drills where they did opening the hip, like these are deciphering points, right? Or, when you look at some of your younger offensive linemen, did you do a good enough job of, developing their strength levels? Because there is no redshirt years in the NFL. One of the things that we did is, regardless, most of our young offensive linemen had to lift with the practice squad because they needed the extra work. These are things that you can go into. Conditioning is hard because a lot of conditioning, once you get to training camp and or the season, is going to be based off of practice tempo. So you can condition the hell out of a team and walk into preseason camp and be like, oh, these guys are in great condition. But then the coach doesn't train with a high level of tempo in practice. So what happens? They're going to detrain because seasons are more longer now in all sports than the ability to prepare is, especially at the pro level with the on-site versus off-site training. You have to be aware of that, right? So the other thing from the professional model is, as a strength coach for the team, you have to be aware of where most of your athletes train off season, which I don't like that term, but that's what they use in the NFL, because you have to be aware of, are they with people and respect? Or are they with people who are trying to show out on Instagram? Because I think a lot of times with some of these trainers, that it's not about what you have on Instagram, it's what you're doing for the athlete to benefit them. And a lot of times you see some of these athletes doing some really what people would consider cool stuff for Instagram in February and March. And I'm like, that's a little too early for that. Like, for me, I want the people who work with my athletes, especially in the NFL, is from the time they start back with you to the time they report for our on-site training plan. I just need you to get them prepared for April. I don't need them to be prepared for August. That'll happen in July. So I think you got to look at it from a crescendo. Just like when I get the guys back in April, I got to think of it as they haven't done anything since the end of the season because I haven't seen them. And then I build a plan where they peak to have a really good mini camp. So we leave on a high level of preparation so that they're motivated to continue for the 6 weeks before training camp, if that makes sense. The biggest difference between college and pro is college, the onus of preparation is on the strength and conditioning staff or the performance staff, because nowadays most athletes live on campus for their 2, 3, 4, 5 years they're on campus. So everything's dictated from a preparation standpoint by the people on site. In professional sports, based off CBA and collective bargaining, these guys disappear for long periods of time. So the onus of preparation becomes now on the professional, and that's why you're a professional. So nobody's telling you what time to wake up. No one's telling you what time to get to the gym. A large majority of the developmental stages of the competitive year. So again, all this stuff factors in, right? Like, all right, who does this, who does that, and the older the athlete gets, the more they understand when they need to start. Like, what I learned over time was the majority of your high-level guys from the NFL, they'll wait till after the Super Bowl to get rolling, because it takes them a long time to just get their body back. They've earned every dollar they get. Professional football players. It's just what I was able to watch from the sideline was just something that was undescribable to me, because as a Division I football player, you have aspirations to play in the NFL. And after watching football, you know how I always tell people, you know how the older you get, the more you promote how good you were at what you did as an athlete, right? Like, oh, I was baller, right? Every year I watched the NFL, I was like, man, was I even that good in college? Like, these dudes are like legit friggin' good. So it's kind of funny when you see it. And so, that all this comes into play. I mean, it's a big understanding. It's such a broad-based scope that you have to be aware of. Like, I think a lot of times strength coaches, we look like this when we should be looking like this. So I always was aware of the peripheral, like what the big picture looks like. What does the athletic director really expect? What does the football coach expect? What does the general manager expect? What does the owner expect? And more importantly, what does the athlete expect from you? Like, I used to, back when I started, when we were considered like support staff and stuff like that, and we used to get pissed about that. And then I embraced it. Like, yeah, you're right. I do. I support the entire athletic department because every athlete comes through my room. And we are a service to the athlete. Doesn't mean we're a servant. Like Donnell Boucher's got a great quote. We were talking about we're in a service profession, but that doesn't mean we're a servant where we're going to, get pounded by, how we don't act accordingly to what people expect. We're serving a purpose to help you enhance your goals, and it's a team effort. It's a collaborative effort of trying to work outside of the silos that we've created to build the ultimate dream for an athlete, is to prolong their career as long as their capabilities at what level that is. If it's a 5-year career in college, or if it's a 15-year career in the NFL or NBA or professional tennis or whatever it might be.
Right. No, that's a great point. I think you're right too, talking about like when we've like first started talking about like success and how you determine it. Oh, I think a lot of strength coaches end up putting on the blinders, and it's different like based off what level you are. If you're a football, basketball, even like some of these Olympic jobs and like baseball now in college, obviously professional is like it where you're hired and fired based off how the team does. A lot of the other positions, like on the Olympic side and stuff, you're like how it was when you had multiple teams. If a team, you could have all your teams be under 500 and you could still be safe for a job.
Well, you got to remember too, now here's the other thing too with this is, and again, you got to accept this if you're a coach. If you are a what I call sports specific strength coach, if you've evolved into one of the sports now that has a strength coach and you work specifically with that team, you're an assistant coach for that team. You're getting fired if they don't win. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. When you talk about, like you said, my son is a director of Olympic sports. He works with 11 sports that really aren't going to get you fired. There's something to be said about that, right? Like, you want longevity, you want to stay in one place a long time, Those are nice roles. You're gonna win some, you're gonna lose some, but in the end, if you care for, that's where you're getting evaluated on how well you care for the athlete. Like if you know their name, show up to practice, work them hard, show them really that's where show them how much you care. They don't care how much you know. Like those types of quotes fit right there with those what I call the non affected sport based off record.
Right.
And again, I still believe you want to win. Like, I've taught, at the end, regardless, you don't want to lose. Like success breeds success. If you work with 11 sports that never win, nobody's going to know you. And let's face it. If you're in sports, you want people to know you. My son, he won. His bragging point to me now is he won a national championship with the equestrian team last year at SMU, and I never won a national championship in college. So he uses that against me now, and good, and again, rightfully so. But would he have earned that ring from that coach if he didn't go to practice, if he didn't care for the athletes, if he didn't work hard to develop a plan that made sense for what an equestrian athlete does? And again, those are, everybody wants to make money. At the end of the day, you'd like to get a raise, but you know how it is. Those are like the attaboy pat on the backs that you hope to get when you work with those sports. Like, are you going to be on the ring list? Like my son told me that they won whatever night they won, the coach hit him up at like 3:00 in the morning and said, send me your ring size. That means that you showed that you're a part of their team, because they don't have to get you the ring. They can be, they just were putting in work for us. They didn't care. But you go to the matches, you go to the games, you know the kids' names. You developed a plan. When they come in, you treat them like they were the football team. And that's how we did things at Arizona State. Because I oversaw the entire program. And hey, you're the head strength coach of that sport. You better care for them.
Right.
Like that's your sport. Like we want them to know. We had some of the best years in the Sears. At that point, it was the Sears Directors Cup. I think they just call it now the Directors Cup, because that was our goal. Like our goal as a traditional department where everything was under one roof, so to speak, was we wanted to win the Directors Cup. That was our goal. And that was our aspiration as a sports performance department, was, well, how can we value our greatness? Well, let's win the Directors Cup. So every year we got higher and higher. That was kudos to what my team was doing within the team of Arizona State Athletics. And I don't think enough in this day and age, it's a little harder, but if you're in a traditional model, where regardless of the level, I think they have these Directors Cups. If you're in a traditional level model where you have a one programming universal system for your athletes, to me, that should be the number one goal of your program, as whether you call it strength and conditioning or sports performance or athlete development, whatever the title of your department is, your number one goal should be 1, win the Directors Cup, 2, top 5, 3, top 10. And then it's, win your all sports conference championships, right? I believe a lot of conferences still do that. I mean, we did that at Boise State. I can't remember how many all men's, all women's, and combined we won during that time. And I would like to think it's because from our standpoint, we committed to strength and conditioning for all sports. And we had value, and we offered value to those teams and those coaches.
No, that's a great way. That's a great goal as a department too. Like when you're under one kind of umbrella, to actually like try to push towards that. And I think it's the same way you kind of talked about when you first started at Boise, and you were shifting that program with basketball to it not be just a recycled football program. Every program wants to feel like they're important. And if you come in and you treat them like how a lot of athletes, because they're not dumb, how they perceive the football team gets treated when they come in and they're the number one priority, like the mindset shifts and they're on board. Like they know that there's not 100,000 people going to watch them play or like watch them ride for equestrian, whatever it is. But if when they come in, like you're excited for them to train and you have a program specific for them, like that means a lot for them too. I
Well, the
wanted to kind
Olympic athletes care a lot more. Like, and the good thing about, like, I love training women because they want to do it right. Like, they care about technique. They don't care about how much is on. They really just want you to. They just want to do things right, and they work hard. Like, they work hard. Women athletes have a chip on their shoulder. That's for sure.
yeah, they definitely like feedback, and you're right too. Like the technique side of it, that's what they want to see the improvement in. When since you've worked with some very high level professional athletes and like probably some really high level collegiate athletes too over the course of time, I know you talked about Greg Olson too, and just like his commitment to improve each and every season. Like working with like pro strongman like Brian Shaw for the last couple years, like leading up to World's Strongest Man, like how do you kind of individualize and evaluate exactly what a super high level athlete like that needs? Like what kind of considerations go into place? Because this is the same thing we talk about nowadays. Athletes have so much access to multiple kind of coaches, specialist coaches, rehab specialists, like social media, consulting, and they have thousands of people reaching out to them for sponsors and things like that. How do you kind of decipher all the information they have and kind of put their thoughts into the program, into place to just be that one piece that helps them individually prepare for the one top of the 1%?
I think, again, everybody's got to have a different perspective. I think depending on where you are in your career will allow you to handle that a lot differently. Like, as much as I wanted to be in the NFL, I think if I would have gotten in the NFL 10 years younger than I did, I don't know if I would have been as successful. I had a big different perspective on what that looked like. It gave me 10 more years to figure out what that plan looked like. I will say training Brian Shaw was the hardest job I've ever had in coaching, because it's the first time where the weight room was first, if that makes sense, where if we had a bad day in the weight room, that would affect our abilities on the competition floor. Whereas if a guy has a bad day in the weight room, he could still have a good practice. So people need to, that was extremely tough. And then coming in at a time when Brian had already established himself, if not the greatest of all time, the second to Jovutis Savickas, the Big Z. I mean, those two guys are going to go head to head. Whatever camp you're on is going to determine on who you think the best is and how you evaluate what the greatest of all time means. So, first of all, it's always good to have relationships. So Brian interned for me at Arizona State in the early 2000s. So I've known Brian before he was a strongman. I was there when Brian came to us and said he was going to leave coaching because he wanted to pursue this endeavor. He had a goal and aspiration, and he wound up doing it 4 different times, which is pretty impressive, to say the least. And so we had always conversed. I really believe that I was brought on at the time I was is because Brian was really was having a lot of hamstring issues with the deadlift. Different bars, different things were happening, and it was getting to a point where I think his frustration was superseding his confidence. Let's just be quite honest. And I had always talked to him when I'd see things happen. I'd ask, we were conversing, especially once text messaging came by and stuff like that. So I really believe he brought me on because at that point, he was going to try to make one more run at World's Strongest Man. I think he was going to shut it down. So 2022, I think he was thinking in the back of his head, this was it. He had just come off a second place finish to Tom Stoltman the year before. I think that was a little bit surprising because of the couple of years before that, he didn't make the podium. So I think he wanted to make one more big run and was going to pull out all the stops, but he knew he needed some help. For the most part, Brian's always been his own coach. I think he's brought in people like myself at times to help fill in the pieces, if that makes sense. And I think I was primarily brought on to help him reconstruct himself because the deadlift is a monster event in strongman that one event can cost you a podium or a win. And Brian, at that time, as most of you know, he was one of the greatest deadlifters of all time. I don't know how many guys have deadlifted over 1,000 more than Brian Shaw. So these are big weights. So we really, and again, Brian was very coachable to a point where I thought he was over coachable. Year one, we learned a lot. Year two, we had a much better relationship, coach to athlete, athlete to coach, what our roles were. That's for a different podcast. But long story short, we had to rebuild the deadlift. And obviously, the elite level athlete, it takes longer because they're used to their compensations, they're used to their specifics. So it really took us 2 full years. Like the peak, the epitome of what we tried to accomplish and hopefully gotten done in 1 year really took almost 2. Like we saw the fruitions of the rebuild of the deadlift at World's Strongest Man this year, and then more importantly, at the Strongest Man on Earth competition when he pulled that 1080 Hummer tire deadlift. That was the culmination of him committing to the rebuild of the deadlift for 2 years, because the first year going into World's Strongest Man, I still think his confidence was shaken by the hamstring issues. And although we had made good progress, but going into year 2, you could tell the deadlift was in a good place. And I know that several of the veteran competitors, when he deadlifted at World's Strongest Man that year in both the prelims and the finals, said that looked like the Brian of old. So that, as a coach, and one of the reasons why I was there, my opinion, to help rebuild that was very, rewarding. But year one, but again, like we say, I was brought in for him to win a 5th title. We didn't win a 5th title. That's on me. Just the way it is. I mean, you're a coach. You protect your athletes. They lose, it's on me. They win, it's on them. And if you would have told me by some of the things, what we called grown man problems, right? Because he's a grown man with businesses and kids. If you would have told me we would place 4th and 7th in the 2 strongman, World's Strongest Man competitions I coached him with, based off of everything that I know, I would have told you it would have been the opposite. I think the way training went, the first year he should have been 7th and he came in 4th. And then the way training went the second year, he should have been 4th or even podium rather than 7th. But that just shows you how things change and who's in the final versus who's not, who's on the come up, who's not, what events affected you, what doesn't. It was an eye-opening experience. It would make me, like I said, when I was in transition between Louisville and the Panthers, I was in the private sector coaching 10-year-old athletes. That made me a better coach when I went to the pros. Working with Brian, if I were ever to get back into the team sports, would make me a better team sport athlete, because now I know the real pressure of being a strength coach for an athlete that strength matters. So that was a great learning experience. I'm always be appreciative to Brian. I'm actually working with him still with his little MMA endeavor, which he hates the weight programs because they don't count. I feel for him. I told him, let's just knock this guy's out and we can get back to training for real. But so again, everything's a learning process if you allow it to be. I got my eyes really wide open. So those who have been successful strongman coaches, man, I really, really admire them, because most of us that are coaching the strongman have never lifted those weights. And that's one thing I learned from Dave Tate. It's hard to develop plans for athletes that weights are so phenomenal that you have no understanding of what that feels like. And I think that's why, to be honest with you, Big Laws or Lawrence Chalet has done a really good job as a coach, because he's handled those loads. He's been to the epitome of what that sport is. But then you have Dan Hipkiss, who's Tom Stoltman's coach, who has really looked at it from a more cerebral approach, and look at what he's been able to accomplish. Now, again, they all have great athletes they're working with, right? It's not like they've got, these are the highest of the highs. So they're very fortunate. Just like with me, I inherit an athlete who's a 4-time world's strongest man. I mean, that's not taking I'm working with a gentleman now who's starting from scratch. Is a way different than dealing with that. And so from that standpoint, it's kudos to the coaches, right? But it's a combination of a lot of things. And, it's again, what can you learn from your experiences that bring you to another realm of what you do, and how can that enhance your skills? Only you will accept or reject how that works for you. So for me, it was, I embraced the challenge. I did not, I do believe now that I was probably a little overconfident year one working with Brian, because I didn't realize how much I didn't know when it comes to the sports. Like with the event stuff, man, there's a lot of things that, Brian, while when it was all said and done, Brian had to be the event coach. Like, it's like position coaches. Like I know 100% now know if a champion strongman called me and asked me to be a part of his team, right off the bat, I'm setting the parameters. This is my role. Because you have to put a team together.
Right.
I know what my role is. Now, I'm still learning the events. Now, that's with the high levels. With beginners, I can handle the events. But the high levels, I want somebody, more so the athlete, helping me direct events. I can talk about volumes, loads, what we're thinking, rest time, play time, but like event specifics. And that's why I try to train the events at a load that I'm capable of doing. Just again, I'm big into the kinesthetics of it, feeling, placements. But then they have to really dictate what they know, because what you find is, I believe, you have Prilepin's charts, you have your sets and reps. It is 100% auto-regulation when it comes to competition training phase with those guys, because the loads are so big and so massive that you can't do a linear load, you can't do a wave loading. It's pretty much, I don't want to say hit or miss, but it's really, how do they wake up? Because if it's go time, go. If it's not, you got to pull back and just chalk it up for, hey man, we're just stacking bricks.
Right. Yeah, you can't really go into a 1,000-pound elephant bar deadlift or whatever that frame carry at the Arnold is that always is up the incline, that you can't go into that on a bad day or feeling
And again,
unconfident.
and you have to find ways to train it. Like, for example, if you train the frame too much on a flat and try to pick that up going up an incline, if that front hits the incline, you're in trouble.
Oh yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, was it Tom Evans? I just saw, he must have went out to like a factory where, they back it down into like a lift gate,
right?
Back it into the deal. And usually it looks like this, right? You back the truck down and then it levels off, so you can open the door right into the ground floor.
Yeah.
I believe I just saw him post a video where he's at one of those places working up the ramp, which makes sense, because like I know, even like with the farmer's walk, the way I teach beginners how to carry a farmer's, where I want the nose pointed down to get momentum.
Yep.
If I do that on an incline, I'm at a detriment for my athlete.
Yeah, it's very counterintuitive how you normally would carry, because you want your forward momentum, everything going, and you're going uphill, but you don't want to lean back so far that you don't have no grip.
So it's almost like where I would have them put their hands a little further back so it tips forward. Now I want their hands a little forward so it tips up.
Right.
So these are things, again, it's that's like, I was just in December, I still got to write this though. I have to write this summary up. I went to OSG in December at Charleston, and I'm watching the 60. Like, forget it, every athlete there was impressive, but the women, the loads the women were using were like crazy. The 80-kilogram women class was ridiculous, but the 64K women class, some of the loads they were using, I don't know if I could hit some of the openers.
It's
ridiculous, man. It's just crazy. And again, what is that showing us, right? Like we talk about with the professional CrossFitters, and it's showing the body, we can stress the body. to capabilities that we didn't think were possible. Because again, it becomes back to like the fight or flight, right? Parasympathetic, sympathetic. When fear kicks in, you're trying to shut things down. Or the stories of the older grandma with the superhuman strength because they had a car wreck. You see all this. And I think what strongmen and CrossFitters have done is, from the mental standpoint, they've elevated that level of fear to a point where they can cross more thresholds than us.
Right.
That makes sense.
No.
They've changed the fight or flight level of abilities where, again, man, it's crazy stuff to think about for sure.
No, it's impressive. It's really cool because that's a very unique experience to get. And I didn't realize that at one point in time he actually, like Brian, had actually interned with you. So that's awesome to kind of keep that relationship going with a former intern, and obviously like for him to have success and you be a part of that and really start to kind of figure out how elite level strongman training looks like. And I know working together, you guys are going to be able to evaluate that. So, hey, coach, like any good training session, we end the show with a finisher. So I got 4 quarters, 4 questions. You can go fast on rapid fire in any of them, or you could take your time. But you ready?
All right, let's do this.
All right, first one I got for you. Biggest influence in strength and conditioning and favorite athlete growing up.
Biggest influence on me on strength and conditioning. Oh man, it's hard. I have, well, obviously my high school football coach, college strength coach. Mike Gentry was a favorite. John Gamble was a favorite when I first got in. So I'll just leave those 4. Favorite athlete growing up, that's easy. Lyle Alzado. He went to my high school. That's the reason why I wore 77 in college. He was a few years younger than my dad. I got to train with him when he was with the Raiders. So yeah, so that's easy.
Nice.
That's an easy one.
Hey, so you talked about it like you love the weight room and that's like one of your hobbies. But if it wasn't something in the weight room and you're not coaching or training, what can you be found doing?
Nothing. Nowadays, again, I went on my first vacation and I actually enjoyed it to a point where my first real vacation. So my wife got me overseas finally. We went to Italy. So right now, we have to figure certain things out, but I think our next trip's going to be Ireland. So I'm not there. I don't know if I'll ever be a pure vacationist, but I did enjoy it. I needed it. I realized I needed it. I miss it. If you are a coach, do yourself a favor. Don't get wrapped up with the 365. Find a way where you can just get away from it all and shut off everything and enjoy life, because I know coaching will wear you out.
Definitely. No, that's a great advice. Hey, so if you were now or go back and you weren't coaching, what do you think you would be doing as a profession?
Well, if I didn't get hurt, I think I would have at least got an opportunity to be in an NFL training camp. Again, you don't want to live in that past, but I think I would have at least had an opportunity to get cut. I don't know, to be honest with you. Maybe I don't know what it would. I allegedly was majoring in economics and business, so maybe I don't know.
Maybe.
I mean, I'm from New York. I could have been on the stock market. I don't know. I think it worked the way it was supposed to work.
It definitely did. Yeah, that's a different life. That's a different coach house for sure. Hey, so if you're setting up, I know you got training after this, so if you're setting up an ideal training day for yourself, what are you listening to when you're lifting, and what's the best post-training meal after that lift?
So for me at this point, I listen to sports radio. Depending on the time of day, I love Bart and Hahn on ESPN. They were national. Now they're back just on New York. So luckily I have the app. The morning shows have all been pretty decent. I remember, Mike and Mike, I started with when I first started doing that. And then It was Keyshawn, Jay, Will, and Max. I didn't mind them. I didn't know how that was going to go over. And now they got Canty, Evan, and Michelle. They're the unsportsmanlike crew on ESPN. So those are what I usually listen to. Harry and Fitz, I think, is the other one. Harry Douglas, who I just missed when I was at Louisville, but I do know who he is. Sometimes I'll put on a podcast, depending on what that podcast is, because sometimes podcasts can put you to sleep. But yeah, for me, it's 100% sports radio. And if I haven't made my own meals here, it's Waffle House. That's a no-brainer.
Hey, so last one I got for you for overtime. All right, you've been in the strength game for a while. You've been lifting for a long time too. What would be kind of your best advice for making coaching and training like last for the long term?
Oh, well, coaching is just going to be about, can you continue to fight the good fight as far as the time and effort it takes to be successful and whatever your definition of success is. The training is, you just got to adapt to who you are and not live in the past. Like, your 100% changes. My 100% of what I was when I played versus when I got hurt versus when I was full-time powerlifting, which, lasted a 20-plus career of powerlifting, to when I created Tortoise Training 1.0 based off of limitations and age, to creating Tortoise Training 2.0 to train around injuries. So you just have to realize that you are who you are today, not what you were yesterday. And, there's certain things you're not going to be able to do at a certain level. Like, I haven't been able to bench press my body weight since 2009. I was supposed to have a rotator cuff surgery. I just said, why? I'm not worried about bench pressing my body weight, so I can train around it efficiently. Supposed to have a knee replacement, so I always committed, as a competitive powerlifter, depth is important. In athletics, you can manipulate depths based off of people's movement abilities as long as it's efficient patterning. So for me, one of the things I had to wrap my head around was, hey, you ain't squatting to depth anymore. This came over time. So one of the things I've adapted to now in Tortoise Training 2.0 is, when I was competing, my box squat height was 15 3/4. Now it's 18 inches. Just things you got to accept. And the good thing is, I can squat to 18 inches and wake up the next morning with no pain. So you just got to learn who you are, be where your feet are at, right? And just understand your 100% today is going to be different than it is tomorrow and what it was 10, 15, and 20 years from now.
Awesome. No, that's great advice, Coach. Obviously, you've been in it for a while, so anybody can appreciate those things wherever you are in your career. So, like I said, I'm stoked to get you on the show. It was a complete honor. So, for anybody that wants to follow along and kind of see what you've got going on, all your websites and all your programming and the books and everything too, where can they kind of get those things?
Yeah, the easiest way, and again, we're in a process of reevaluating the website, but www.bighousepower.com is where you can find a lot of our material. And then I spend most of the time in social media on Instagram at Big House Power.
Awesome.
That's kind of the easiest ways to follow us. We do have some projects coming up. I am finally writing the second edition to the Coach's Strength Training Playbook, and then we'll launch a certificate program, or what I call a qualification program. Are you qualified to understand the procedures of the tier system? And got some cool stuff I may be launching after. I just told you, been on well over 100 podcasts. I think it's time to launch my own. And I think that could be on the way in 2024.
Awesome. Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to all those things. I'm sure everybody else is too. So, hey, good luck with all that, Coach. And like I said, thank you again for coming on today. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to you.
I appreciate it, Nick. Thanks for thinking of me.
Of course, Coach.
Words win.
That's it for this episode of The Strength Game. Thank you again to this week's guest and to our sponsors. Be sure to connect and keep up with our guests at the links in the description below. Remember to subscribe to us on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast provider to stay up to date on all future episodes. Also, check us out on YouTube and CoachO'Brien.com. where you can find all the video versions of these episodes, as well as show notes, episode schedule, and much more. Comments, ratings, and reviews are always welcome and appreciated. Thanks again for tuning in, and be sure to join us next week for another great episode of The Strength Game.